Welcome to this special episode of the John Henry Westen Show. I'm your host, John Henry Westen. England is on lockdown. Churches are locked shut by order of law, and yet the subway that is the underground is still packed. Flights are still coming in from China and Iran and from Italy, and we're going to talk about it with LifeSite's own London correspondent, Paul Smeaton. You're going to want to stay tuned. Just before we start today, let me ask you please to consider giving LifeSite News a donation for our spring campaign, which is currently ending. We need your help to keep this program going, as well as all the news we share each and every day on lifesitenews.com. Please visit give.lifesitenews.com right now to give us your most generous gift. That is give.lifesitenews.com. Let's begin as we always do with the sign of the cross. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Paul Smeaton, welcome to the program.
Thank you, John Henry. Good to be with you.
All right. This is unbelievable what's been going on. As much of the world, I believe people are reporting that about 3 billion people are on lockdown. London is no exception yet. There are some very specific things going on in London that are very shocking. Tell us about what's happening.
Okay, so prior to this week, we haven't been on lockdown. There were recommendations issued by the government, but they were not law. We were not obliged to follow them. And so this week, they've come into force. There was a dramatic press conference with Prime Minister Boris Johnson on Monday. And I think a lot of people, well, certainly I am and many others, are a bit shocked by the extent of those measures. So everybody has been told to stay at home. You're only allowed to go to work if absolutely necessary. You're only supposed to leave the house once a day at most. And you're only allowed to leave for four reasons, one of 4 reasons. So to go to the shops, to get food, if you need the food, for medical supplies, for work if you absolutely have to, and so all of a sudden we can't do ordinary things like go to visit our friends, or even potentially be out for too long. You know, you're not supposed to go out just for any reason. It's got to be for a particular reason.
They have it once a day for exercise as well, which I found quite interesting. It's the same kind of allowance for prisoners. They also get out once a day for exercise. Unbelievable. And it does feel like a police state a little bit, I'm sure. And yet we're told this is for health reasons. But there's some very strange disparities. One of the things that we note is that the churches are locked by order of law, and yet in the Magna Carta, that's one of the things guaranteed first and foremost, is the freedom of religion, the freedom of the church. Maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, well, I think that's probably the thing which is going to be hardest, certainly for Catholics, the fact that for the next 3 weeks, we can't go to a church to pray, we can't go to Mass, and we don't even know when the next time we might be able to go to confession is, because you're not actually meant to socialise, to mix with anyone who's not of your household, and there's no provision for those sorts of necessary services in the government's legislation. So that's very strange, and it's obviously something that all of us are, our heads are spinning. We're trying to get our heads around this what's an utterly unknown situation for us.
Yeah, absolutely incredible, because you have this situation where you are now there are all sorts of things deemed essential, not the Mass, not confession, and yet you have a subway system, or underground as you call it, which is packed with people, flights still coming in from China, Iran, and Italy. That's all seemingly very dangerous. Yet Mass could be practiced in a very safe way in a large church with, let's say, only 50 people or only 10 or however many, with them all wearing face masks, let's say, and keeping 6 feet apart or 6 feet or even meters apart or whatever. All that could be done respectfully with the proper measures, and yet that's not even thought of because it's not seen as something essential. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, with the underground thing, I think is particularly striking. So, because it's the government who's imposed this measure, this government who's imposed this legislation, and they're allowing for a certain amount of people to go to work, people who absolutely have to go into work, and many of those people just wouldn't have any other means to get to their places of work other than by taking the underground. So the thing that's happened there, though, is that because of the crisis, the number of services running on the underground has been dramatically reduced. So even though there's less people using it, there's less services for those people to get on. And so while many of us are adjusting to government policies unlike anything we ever have known in our life or ever expected to know, at the same time, the system is such that people can't avoid flagrantly going against those requirements, going against the requirements to social distance, because if they're getting on a train, you're not 2 meters apart from somebody, you've got several people, 10 or more people within 2 meters of you. You look at the photos for yourself. I'm sure you put them up for our viewers to see. The scenes on London, you're a baked bean in there, and you're squashed up against everybody. It's couldn't be less like social distancing. So, I mean, if you were going to take a sympathetic view of the government and what's happened, you'd say that this is an impossible situation for anyone to manage without inconsistencies. But what certainly is the case is that there's inconsistencies, and that's possibly chief among them. The other one is going to supermarkets. So people, it's difficult to social distance in supermarkets. I think it probably happens to some extent in some places and not others. But I think you're 100% right about the situation with churches. That's probably fairly easy to manage in a church. I think most churchgoers would be more than willing to help in any way that they could to adhere to what the government's asking in order to go to a church. But I don't think it's been campaigned for. I don't think it's been asked for by our bishops. And it was interesting that they cancelled public attendance at Sunday Mass before that was even asked of them by the government. That's now been ordered, so there's now no option. If you want to obey the law, then you have to cancel Mass. But last weekend there was the option, and the bishops decided to cancel Mass anyway.
Yeah, it's incredible to me also because there's so many groups fighting for their services as essential services, and successfully so. And this is another huge disparity. So the abortion lobby has successfully, in England, lobbied that their abortions are an essential service. And tell us about what's going on there.
Yeah, so the whole situation with abortion in England is one of the strangest things that's happened. So abortions, I think, are basically continuing as normal for now. So I think there's been a number of questions raised by pro-life groups in this country asking how they possibly can, how anyone can have the medical expertise to say that they don't present an increased risk of passing on the coronavirus. So there's that aspect to it. But the really strange aspect to it was that we had earlier this week a dramatic expansion in abortion in this country for a very short period of time. I think that there's an incredible story there. We don't have all the details at present. Maybe we will one day. So earlier this week, the government had on its website that there'd basically been a massive expansion for abortion. What was happening was legislation was issued by the government without a vote that DIY abortions at home were going to be available on demand in response to the coronavirus. So women being able to take both stages of the abortion pill at home at request. Now, that was on the government website. That appeared to be legislation for a period, and then overnight it disappeared. We don't know. We don't know quite what happened. Please God, there's a hero somewhere in that story, and one day we'll know the full details. But it's something that the abortion lobby wanted for many years, and just like in the States, you're seeing it where the abortion lobby are trying to push through expansions to abortion laws in response to this virus. The same thing appeared to happen here, but then was reversed.
Unbelievable. There's all sorts of strange things happening with regard to legislation because, as you said, everybody's in disarray. People are looking out for themselves, trying to get the provisions they need to survive a lockdown where they're restricted in terms of getting outside. And yet all of this stuff is being pushed through legislatively, giving massive powers, restricting freedoms of people day after day after day. Tell us a little bit about the powers being pushed through and concerns that way.
Yeah, well, I mean, with those, I think it's possibly too early to speak authoritatively on them because the legislation has been going through this week. So what I'd say is that I think people are responding to this crisis in different ways, and there's so many big things happening that your attention is shifting from one thing to the other as days go by. And what I think we've seen is an increased concern about risk of the virus itself, but maybe less concern among the general public about the restriction of our civil liberties and about the powers that the state is accruing to itself. So one thing that I believe has been explored on an article appearing on LifeSite is this idea that psychiatrists now, they may have the right to section, so to put into mental institutions, people who they deem to be a mental health risk indefinitely. Previously there was a 6-month cap on the time that could be done. It had to be approved by 2 doctors. It's now 1, and apparently no time cap. So that sort of thing. Wow. And there seems to be increased powers given to the state for surveillance of individuals. These sorts of things are very worrying, and maybe more worrying is how few people are talking about them. I think one person who is speaking about them a lot is the prominent Daily Mail journalist Peter Hitchens, but he's taking a lot of criticism online for raising that, and I don't know how many voices are joining with him.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of these kinds of powers of the state and or even more nefarious proposals, one of the proposals that we saw and is on LifeSite right now is just shocking, is actually a proposal for one world government. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so that was something that I saw just before coming on this call with you. And so Gordon Brown, one of our former prime ministers, is reported in The Guardian as having called for global government in response to the coronavirus. So apparently it's temporary, so I don't know if we should have some consolation in that, and who knows what sort of response that's going to get. But I think that's just part of a picture of witnessing, all of us sort of getting used to in the last couple of weeks, witnessing dramatic world events, dramatic statements, and dramatic things that impact our lives in the most basic way, happening on a daily basis. So please God, there won't, there'll be resistance to that, and that won't be picked up. But yeah, hugely concerning.
Unbelievable. Just so many things happening day after day after day. You don't know what's coming. One of the things that you mentioned is that we'll be at this for 3 weeks. What is the official date of release, if you will, from this kind of system? Or when do we get out of jail?
I'm sure that some will argue that that in the case of this of a health crisis, that it's a necessary measure. But what I can certainly say is that it's a huge suffering for Catholics to to be facing that.
Absolutely.
It's not something that I think any of us ever expected to see.
Yeah, we've never seen anything like this in the history of the world, actually. You've never had a shutdown, a complete shutdown, almost all over the world, of the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass.
Yeah.
Tell me, Paul, you being right in the middle of things as a life site correspondent, you're following this stuff every day from most parts of the globe. Tell me, what are your concerns right now?
Well, it's a great question. So probably like many people, I've lots of concerns. So I've concerns about my own health and the health of those dear to me and my family and friends, and I've concerns about the state of the world and the state of my country, and particularly, I suppose, I'm based here in London. I think that, as we said, nobody knows what's coming next, and I think the only reference point that I have for an event like this is the 2011 London riots, which were made international news and were at the time probably the most dramatic thing I'd lived through. I think it's already surpassed. This crisis has already surpassed that. So with the London riots, we saw looting, violence, violent scenes on the streets, businesses being destroyed by looters or rioters, cars set on fire over a number of days. It was spreading, it was getting more dramatic. There was a sense that the government didn't have full control of the situation, that the police authorities didn't have full control of the situation. And it was the same in this for me, in the sense that nobody knew where this was going to go. That's the comparison that I draw. We didn't know what was going to happen from one day to the next. Now, I'd say this has already surpassed the London riots in terms of changes to people's lives. Ultimately, with the London riots, ultimately life got back to normal pretty quickly. But already for lots of people, life isn't going back to normal. It's clear. For people who've lost their job without much hope of getting it back, life isn't going back to normal. People who've witnessed, all of us have witnessed this immense power grab by the state in the last few days. Life's not going back to normal from that perspective. But one thing that we haven't had yet is riots. And since those riots in 2011, we've had a steady stream of terrorist incidents in London. People tend to forget those pretty quickly too. And we've also had a soar in violent crime in our streets, in particular knife crime. That's a huge story on its own and really has been spiralling out of control for several years. So as a Londoner, knowing that I come from a city of riots down through the ages, and which seems to have become more violent than ever in recent years, I am concerned that will play out if tensions continue to increase, and if the uncertainty continues to increase. If people don't know what's going on, if people feel they're having their freedoms restricted and they don't really know why, then I who knows? Please God, it won't. I think these things, many people are making the point that these situations bring out the best as well as the worst. And I think so far, we're seeing a lot of the best. But as I say, we don't know. We don't know what's coming.
Right. Some people have talked about this as a chastisement from God.
Yeah.
John Smeaton, your father, in fact, has mentioned that because of the grievous, heinous sins that we're committing, abortion, for instance, top of the pile. What do you make of those assertions?
I think that some people would probably say that we've potentially been overdue a chastisement for some time. Now, I'd stress none of us know. None of us know what's happening exactly. But I think it's certainly a possibility. One thing that's been on my mind a lot in the last couple of weeks, been recent events in our own country here and also in Ireland. So in 2018, Ireland legalised abortion thanks to a national referendum. So the Irish people themselves voted to legalise the killing of innocent children in the womb. I think there's so many people in the States, in Canada, across England, Australia, with really special and real connections to Ireland. And Ireland's a place that, in the lifetime of my parents, was a truly Catholic nation. My mum grew up in Ireland. My dad was at seminary there briefly. When my dad was at seminary in Ireland, as he'd walk down the streets, people in the public would lift their caps out of respect to the seminarians. People have talked, I think I've seen Michael Voris talk about the streets being thick with incense, and now Ireland's a place that chooses itself to legalise the killing of their own unborn children. So an interesting thing that, again, people forget about was that the night of that referendum, there were the most amazing disturbances in the sky. This is all recorded in mainstream media. I saw one article looking at it this morning, called it the mother of all thunderstorms. I looked out, I was sat in my back garden that evening, and it was unlike anything I'd ever seen. The sky was red when I was looking at it, and it was just a continual stream of constant heavy lightning bolts. It went for long enough that I got bored. I started to think, does this happen all the time? This is just unreal. At Fatima, the miracle of the sun in 1917, we see, the famous miracle that 70,000 people saw. I think Professor Di Mattei talks about this sort of thing a lot of the time. So the sun danced in the sky, but also plummeted towards the people gathered there. And some people interpret from that a certain threat that if mankind doesn't repent, doesn't turn away from sin, that a chastisement is imminent from God. And the sad thing is, as one friend commented to me this morning, there isn't much sign of anybody repenting. There isn't much sign of people repenting in the church. There isn't that much sign of people repenting in general society. There seems to be a focus on trusting the government, on trusting science to deliver us, but I don't think there's been a widespread idea that perhaps we need to review our lives. I think, sadly, as often happens in these situations, many people, at least those people prominent in the media, are coming out confirming the positions they already held. I think we see that in the statements made by Pope Francis earlier this week, suggesting that this is Mother Nature being angry with us. I think that's a confirmation of some of the worst things that we saw at the recent Amazon Synod. I just pray that this situation, wherever it goes, that it gives people enough pause for thought to reconsider their lives, reconsider what's important, and to try to strive to walk towards the good and to turn away from the evil that many people have embraced today.
Very good. Very good. Let's close off with what you are doing with how this has affected your faith.
I wrote an article earlier this week for LifeSite encouraging everybody to pray the Rosary daily as requested by Our Lady of Fatima in 1917. I think for me, I've been speaking to my friends and probably anybody who'll listen for some time now that things can't continue as they have been. We cannot keep murdering our children in the womb. We cannot keep destroying the innocence of children through distorted, immoral sex education that's pumped out across the world. We cannot keep wading further and further into sin as a people, turning away further and further from God. But at the same time, I haven't deep down probably really expected to see the sort of change which is now potentially looming. For me, it's made me realise that life is short and that we don't have any guarantees, and that the time to strive for holiness is now. So fortunately, as an Englishman, with the example of countless saints and martyrs through the ages witnessing to the faith, with countless examples of great devotion to Our Lady, I've got plenty of guides, and I'm blessed to have many good friends. And I think within my own community of Catholic men in London, it's been one of the great consolations that we're really encouraging each other in every way during this period of crisis. Intellectually, we're trying to help each other get our heads around what's going on. Emotionally, dealing with the fact that all of our lives have been turned upside down, but probably most importantly spiritually, we're all encouraging each other that there isn't any time to wait. There's no time for delay to try to grow in holiness. I think the situation is making us realise we don't know what tomorrow holds. Tomorrow could be a more dramatic story than we've seen for the last couple of weeks. So the time to try to grow in holiness is now.
Excellent. Excellent. We remember that all things work for good for those who love him. So whatever hardships we have to deal with, the Lord will make them for our own good. Paul Smeaton, London correspondent for LifeSite News, thank you for being with us, and may God bless you.
Thanks, John Henry.
And God bless all of you. We'll see you next time. Hello, this is John Henry Westen. I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the John Henry Westen Show YouTube channel if you haven't already done so. There you will find all the past episodes and much more. Thanks again for watching, and may God bless you.